Hello and welcome aboard another GCSE History Exam Technique presentation. We're going to focus on importance questions from paper 2. These are worth 8 marks, 16 marks in total because you're going to need to do 2 of these. In this presentation we're going to focus on the Brezhnev Doctrine and the way that it links in to Czechoslovakia in 1968. So here's the question we're going to work on. Explain the importance of the Brezhnev Doctrine for the Soviet Union's control of Czechoslovakia. Now this is a typical question 3 from paper 2, and it's what we can expect to happen again. The question will start with that root of explain the importance of, and then you can see there are 2 topics within the question. For us here it's the Brezhnev Doctrine, which we'll call X, and the Soviet Union's control of Czechoslovakia, which we'll call Y. Now we're not going to get any stimulus material, so this is really going to be a test of our knowledge. Now this question type will only appear on paper 2, but it will appear twice. So in total, we've got 16 marks available here. So before we tackle our question, let's remind ourselves of the topics that we're going to be writing about. Firstly, the Prague Spring. Now this was launched by Alexander Dubček, the Czech leader in the top image. He embarked on a reform program that initially was allowed by Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union, but Brezhnev became increasingly concerned as the program continued, and Dubček introduced a series of increasingly radical steps. Now these included the end of the one-party state, ending censorship, planning to open borders with Western countries, and even developing links with West Germany. Dubček also met with the independent leader of Yugoslavia, Tito, who was a communist but who was not under Soviet control, and Brezhnev seemed to be very concerned that Dubček would lead Czechoslovakia into the same direction. So as a result, there was an invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact countries, led by the Soviet Union, in August of 1968. Now there was some resistance to this invasion, as you can see in the second image. This was mostly led by students. It didn't turn into a huge conflagration as Hungary had done in 1956, and the fighting was soon over. As a result, Dubček was taken to Moscow, interrogated and released, but he was released on the terms that he wouldn't be back as the leader of Czechoslovakia, and he was replaced with Gustav Husak, who you can see in the bottom image. Husak was much more hardline, loyal to Moscow. The reforms of the Prague Spring were ended and reversed. So our second topic within our question is the Brezhnev Doctrine. Now, this was launched by Leonid Brezhnev, the Soviet leader, in 1968, and it stated that the USSR and the Warsaw Pact would intervene to protect the interests of the communist community. This meant that the satellite states of Eastern Europe would only have limited freedom of choice over their own internal policies. They were bound to the one-party system. They were bound into the Warsaw Pact too. They weren't allowed to leave. If any state did fall foul of these kind of directives, then all of the Warsaw Pact countries would intervene directly and collectively against the offending nation. So let's return to our question, and here's what we need to do. We need to come up with 2 P paragraphs, point, evidence, and explanation and elaboration phases. But these paragraphs are going to need to be directed into a specific direction, and we're going to need to show how the first topic, X, made a difference to Y. In these answers, no need for an introduction, no need for a conclusion. So let's firstly prepare the question. On your papers, what it would be an idea to do in the exam hall is to underline the 2 topics. I've underlined X one colour and I've underlined Y in blue. Now we're going to have no stimulus materials, so we're going to have to do the thinking for ourselves here, and before we start writing, we're going to need to think of some of the possible ways in which the Brezhnev Doctrine impacted on the Soviet Union's control of Czechoslovakia. Now I've given this some thought, and here's what I've come up with. I might talk about the end of the Prague Spring, military intervention, the change of leadership, and also the reversal of reforms. I'm not going to write about all of these, I'm going to use 2 of them to write 2 P paragraphs. Any more than that, and I'm going too far, and I won't be picking up more marks. So let's have a look at how these paragraphs might look. As usual, our P paragraph is going to start with a big point. Probably best if this big point is quite broad and quite general, as you can see in the example. You can see that I'll be talking about the way that the invasion was designed to end the Prague Spring reforms. The next phase of our paragraph is evidence. Now in this phase we're looking to show our knowledge and understanding of the topics within the question. You might just like to pause the presentation to read through that. So let's have a look at the final phase of our paragraph, and this is the explain or elaboration phase. It will start with a connective phrase, and it's going to lead in to me discussing how X made a difference to Y. I'm very keen on this connective phrase for these types of questions. The impact of, and then topic X was, and then I'll move on from there. It would be great if you could remember to use this just for these specific questions in mind. And again, you might just like to pause for a moment or so here just to read through our explanation phase. Okay, you might like to pause the presentation here while you read through carefully, trying to spot when the different phases begin. So let's see how you got on. The writing in black is our point. The writing in blue is our evidence phase, which with the use of the underlined connective phrase leads in to our explain phase. In this paragraph, what I'm trying to do all the time is to show the difference that X made to Y. Now you might be thinking this is pretty hard stuff, particularly without the use of stimulus material. There's one little bit of comfort here for you though, in that you will at least get a choice in the examination. The excerpt you can see below comes from the 2018 paper, and you can see how question 3 looked. So we'll be doing 2 of these questions for a total of 16 marks. You can see the question that we've been working on is the third of the 3, but the other 2 have the same root, don't they? So you might just pause for a moment here and see if you can identify the X and the Y topics within the first 2 questions. Okay, so finally, let's see if you want to take this any further. You might want to firstly write your own paragraph on the importance of the Brezhnev Doctrine on Soviet control of Czechoslovakia. Or what you might like to do, to try to help you with your knowledge and understanding, is to revise the Hungarian uprising of 1956 in the top slide there and compare that to Czechoslovakia in 1968. And you might look to compare the causes, the events and the results of the actions in both countries in those different years. Okay, that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thanks for watching. There are other videos for you to have a look at on the CHSG History channel for guidance on the different question types and also material for your knowledge and understanding.